Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where the mind and gym come together to help you live your best life. Hosted by two fitness professionals and your personal trainers, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie. We're live again. All right, so this week we're talking core, squat mobility, and FODMAP diets. So before we get into it, we're also going to have our weekly workout, and we're going to save our food for thought for the end of the episode today. So weekly workout, last week was all posterior chain development, if you remember. This week, drum roll please, what do we have starting off with, Menchie?
Squats.
It seems fitting if we're going to talk about squat mobility.
Yes.
So we said front-loaded squat.
Correct.
Just to help more anterior core engagement.
So dumbbell or kettlebell in front. Or if
you're ready for it, a barbell. If you're ready for that shoulder mobility. Half kneeling horizontal cable press.
Like that.
I like that.
Very underestimated one.
Yeah, you got to get those unilateral movements in, especially for pressing.
And the cable provides that.
I feel like it's too.
I like the cable because it's not just a horizontal on your back. You're actually upright against gravity, pushing horizontally.
Yeah, and I like the cables because you have to stay engaged and properly eccentrically load your lats and scap when you come back. So you're just improving your mechanics. And in that half kneeling position, you're also engaging your glutes, getting that oblique to fire more.
Love it.
It's a good one. And then the next one, which is awful, but it's something you gotta do sometimes, is a split squat. Barbell split squats are really a beautiful thing. Front loaded or back loaded, but so let's just go with the theme of front loaded. That can be done body weight to start, goblets or dumbbells in your hands at your sides, weight at your chest like a goblet squat. Or if you're ready for it, if you get a barbell.
Yeah. More anterior loading.
And then
keep the anterior loading up.
Man, I love barbell step-ups, but I hate barbell split squats. I don't know why.
Jeez. That's
weird. I hike so much, so I love the step-up. Like
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I'm always going up vertical anyway, so I just feel like it's always helping me improve that control. So I really enjoy the step up. And then to top it all off, we have a bird dog, something where you are now in quadruped position or tabletop, hands and knees, and you have to work on keeping that core engaged. It's kind of the next step up from the dead bug. Dead bug, you're on your back. Bird dog, you're on your hands and knees facing the
just
ground.
Flipping it around.
Yeah, and I like it because I think a lot of people have trouble maintaining core position in a squat pattern, even a deadlift pattern. But, similar to how like a lot of programs that we'd write together, you'd have like front squat paired with a Palloff press. You know what I mean?
And that's where the bird dog comes in handy because it's a 90-90 position. It's helping mimic a squat pattern. So that goes into it. You progress from a dead bug to a bird dog, and now you take the floor away, and you have to keep those abs on.
Yeah, so we'll just run through the weekly workout. This week was front-loaded squat, half kneeling horizontal cable press. I'll say that one more time. Half kneeling horizontal cable press. It's a mouthful. Split squat, and then bird dog. So being that we just talked about bird dog anyway, it's perfect because we're about to get going with core. The first topic for today.
Big topic. Huge topic.
Huge topic. Go ahead and define for us what the core is going to do for the body.
The core, which comprises of Internal obliques, external obliques, transverse abdominis. Those are the big core muscles people think of.
Tendinous
All right.
inscriptions, those are the little lines between your abs. Those don't matter as much. The transverse abdominis, I'm going to add in the thoracolumbar
Yep.
fascia linked to our pelvic flooring.
The pelvic floor is part of the core. Boom, right there. So,
Yeah, there
but
you
when
go.
people think
That's
of the
it.
core, they think of abs, they think of abdominals. And our purpose of abdominals are respiratory muscles to influence the rib cage on inhale and exhaling. Take that away, but when we lift, these muscles help secure the rib cage to the hips and allow proper movement and safe movement through patterns positioning. So that's what really the core comes
Yeah,
down to is keeping the hips and rib cage in line with each other for optimal movement.
yeah, I like the analogy of firing a cannon out of a canoe. Like, if you're pressing something or lifting something with your legs and you don't anchor that canoe or you don't anchor you keep your core engaged, that efficiency and that power output is just going haywire. So you got to really anchor that or anchor your legs or your arms to your core. And I yeah, it's funny how we lose sight of what this whole core is because it's really like a cylinder. It's from our waist up to our chest line, our lower ribs there, and that's that whole core keeping all our limbs together and strong and
So
stable.
basically, we're talking,
That
rib cage, hips, all the organs inside, are everything but our
yeah.
appendages.
Yeah, but your everything but your appendages and but your organs, because you are squeezing everything in this area, and a lot of times people get that. It's funny when you get people who are newer to working out or maybe take a long time off, and the first time you get them to do a dead bug, it's like this neuromuscular issue of like, well, what's the muscle and what's the breathing, and they like squeeze everything in, they hold their breath. You know what I mean?
Well, because that's their strategy of trying to keep everything together, and that's where,
They just squeeze everything
yeah,
in that
and that's
area.
where it is very tough exhaling and getting those muscles to all fire together because people want to just create a strategy where it's just tension and then they can't breathe through that without losing that.
Yeah, and I think it is important to state that the core is supposed to um, also, in addition to its movement of flexion into like a crunch or a dumbbell side bend, a lateral bend, or what are some other common ones like a reverse crunch with your legs up, like leg lifts,
Side to
right?
side rotation,
It's supposed to.
side to
What was
side
it?
rotation.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
Russian twist or something. It also is anti all that stuff, anti rotation, anti flexion, anti extension or anti hyperextension rather. So it's funny because it takes that pressurization. It's like you got to pull in and push out at the same time to really activate that whole chamber. I think it's important. I want to talk about our adductors and our proprioceptors from our feet. And then you're the breathing expert, so I want you to go into breathing core
Mm.
mechanics. But it's super important, especially for pelvic floor usage, but especially what we're going to get into is the squat to keep that core engaged. And it usually does start with um, your feet. And a lot of people have poor mobility in the foot, which allows for poor muscle activation through the rest of the leg. Proprioceptors at the bottom of the feet. If they are all bunched up together, you're going to have inefficiency in what's turning on in that system. And you ideally want to, if you need to, take a lacrosse ball under your feet, roll them out for a little bit, stretch out those feet, and you should be able to feel your feet through the floor and be about hip or shoulder distance with your feet on the floor, toes angled out slightly, and you should be able to keep your knees going over your middle toes and getting your butt underneath you, but keeping that core engaged. And I know I saw you do it a lot at
Mm,
Equinox. You would make people squeeze their knees together and force them to sit even lower and lower and lower because most people's squat mechanics mimics really what position they're in mostly, which is uh, sitting.
right.
If you think about
Yeah.
it, you know, like this isn't an end range motion or the
And I give
position.
them that because that's what they're used to and that's what they know. But we're here to train more and enhance that so it's not limited when people are getting close to 90. They're like, I can't do anything else. And that's where,
Yeah.
especially the sometimes core is a I used to use it a lot back in the day. I think it's a good word, but I think it's like a bad word because when people think of it, they're just like, oh, it's just ab training. And there's a lot more
So what do you
to
use?
ab training than just core. I use abdominals now. I really emphasize and have people learn and try to feel what their abdominals actually feel like. Because core, they're kind of like, well, what is that? And I know we defined it, and you can still say that, but I'm kind of going if say more, okay, feel your abdominals engaged. They're trying to get a reference of okay, this is what they're trying to feel. That's just my preference. You'll hear a lot of people say core all the time. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think people, when they reference it, it's like keep your core tight. What's that mean? Does it mean crunch? Does it mean ab crunch? Does it mean side bend twist?
Yeah, I like the abdominals word, and it's funny because there's been a lot of other terms in the past that I've like redirected, and I wish you had told me that because I would have I would have launched it as abdominals. I agree. The core has almost got a bad rap
I'll
because
change it now. We'll call it abdominals.
yeah. Well, let's talk abdominals. Maybe that's why I didn't pick it because
Yeah.
I can't pronounce it.
But I say like the abdominals act on the core axial skeleton system, and the core. What I look at is hips and rib cage coming together. So that's kind of my new way of looking at. So when I'm saying okay, we're moving the core in a squat,
Yes,
we're creating
totally.
that canister and we're moving that whole thing together.
Yeah, and you know what? It's so important because I think a lot of times people just get stuck and they think that there's no way out of it. But despite sitting in a chair, sitting and driving, sitting in a couch, you can still get that end range mobility if you prioritize it and work on it. And it's not something that's going to take a year or 2 years to do. Maybe special case scenarios, but for the most part, it just takes some time and effort and some diligence. And for the most part, people's time in the gym is like, okay, I gotta get in there, I gotta work out real quick, let me put my headphones on, blast the music, and go. And they're not really even mindful about what they're doing. But let's go ahead and you know brief us on some specific breathing mechanic issues that you typically see with abdominals.
The big one we see is usually in the sagittal plane. So going forward and back is ribs in external rotation. So rib cage are kind of flaring and coming up, which gives me the inclination and tells me or a clinician trainer that even in if they're trying to exhale and they can't pull those ribs into internal rotation, that they're lacking that core strength and they don't have the ability to pull those ribs down and together and to pull the hips under and kind of have the system get stacked over each other. So that's sign number one. If I'm seeing ribs come up while they breathe, inhale, and they exhale, and they're coming down a little bit, but they can't maintain that down position, that's a sign of a weak
Hmm.
oblique system that can't anchor the rib cage down towards the hips.
And how does one go about making sure they feel their obliques in a dead bug?
That is a great question. It is all about sense, and when you're sensing things, that's where we want to kind of have the person what they're feeling, because I know what it feels like to exhale completely and feel those abs turn on and those ribs cage goes down together. But some people starting off, they don't need really know what to feel when they do that. So what I do is, have them exhale. You can have them put their hands on their rib cage and exhale all that air out, and have them push their hands down on their rib cage to get even more, and not breathe in and feel what the abs feel like with all that air out. If you take a big exhale and exhale all that air completely, you should feel those abdominals engage. And once they get all that air out and feel those abdominals engage, now I say, okay, now you can move a leg. Can you keep that feeling as you move in a leg? So it's more about breathing and getting a full exhale and letting those obliques really pull those ribs into IR to get engagement of those abs, to get the feeling of it.
Nice, nice. Um, Probably the only other thing I'd want to talk about with breathing is how can you self diagnose if you're using your lower back erectors to breathe in a movement pattern?
How can I self-diagnose myself? For me,
Like
I can.
how could you coach someone to be aware of um, the fact that they are using their lower back erectors to draw air in improperly?
Gotcha. Mirrors, number one, mirrors in sight. If you can show them from the
Okay, I
side
like
that
it.
if
I
they're
like
starting
it.
to squat down and their chest is staying up and their ribs are in an up angle position, that's one sign. So, we're working off proprioception, feel, and then senses. So, can they see that? Okay, they see that. They recognize that's wrong. Other times, people will feel that tension starting to build in that lower back as they're trying to stay upright against the load. They'll feel that lower back tighten, and they might not feel it completely tighten up, but they'll get a sense of kind of what's going on. The other things are, over time, have them do multiple reps and multiple sets. You could have someone do 5 reps. They might not feel the lower back with no weight, but have someone do 15, 20, 30, 40 reps total, no weight. They might feel it, and then add a weight. That volume is going to kind of tell them what their body's going to feel, and that's where biomechanics tend to break down, is when we load or unload, but you start getting high in volume, positions start to break down and people will feel it. So that can be another thing. If put them in an exercise or say, hey, I want you to do 25 reps body weight, and they're like, man, my lower back's tight, I'm feeling hip flexors tight after so many reps, that's a good indication that you might be going into poor patterning as fatigue sets in.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's just really important to mention because we always want to kind of focus on what you should be doing, but it's always really important to also know and be aware of um, kind of inefficiencies in systems and just being proactive in injury
And
prevention.
that's what it's all about.
So
I mean, people are coming in, I know, to get healthier and to train their systems, but ideally, we're putting these movements together so they don't get hurt. If they slip and fall or
yeah,
have a quick reaction, they're not going to end range of motion, or they're not going completely sympathetic where they get hurt. Or if you look at on the other side, athletes, that's why they come into the gym, to get better on the field, but to keep them on the field longer. And I think sometimes people,
right,
I don't want to say look past it, but they come in, they say, okay, I have to go so hard in the gym, but then they end up getting hurt in the gym because they're just overtraining, they're over voluming everything, and they're just running themselves into the ground. Where they're like, yeah, you come in, you work out, you're gonna have hopefully some good residual soreness, but it's never the point where it's like, man, I'm driving myself to pain and soreness.
yeah, and I think also too, a lot of people come in and they're like, "Oh, my shoulders feel good, and my hips feel good. Okay, I'm good to go," and they don't really think about how important it is to be able to breathe through core control. And on top of someone who works 40 hours a week primarily at a desk job, typically their glutes aren't engaged, their quads are tight, and their core isn't able to turn on anyway, and it's just not in people's headspace to think about like breathing. I do it my whole life. I don't need to warm up
Yeah.
my breathing.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then they go to a loaded position. Their breathing mechanics are off. Their core isn't engaged properly through the whole movement. And yeah, right. It manifests itself in an injury or
And that's
something
the
bad,
thing.
something we don't
I've
want.
seen it a lot of times is as soon as you put an external load on someone, you could literally hold someone down, and the one thing the body is going to want to do is breathe. It's going to want to take an inhale, and it will do anything it can to breathe.
It'll
Right.
prioritize
So then
that.
you get
Yeah,
load on it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
if you start breathing, position goes. And I'm not saying people out there, you're not going to get hurt if you do positions that are or exercise that are in poor position or breathing posture, but it can be over time that it can be wear and tear on the system. That's when it become problematic. So that's the first thing on the warm-ups I tell a lot of people to check is make sure the breathing is in check. Make sure your abdominal work, your core work is focused on breathing. Can you exhale and breathe and do that sit up? Can you exhale fully and do the reverse crunch? Because I think all those exercises are great. Russian twist, rotations.
Yeah,
It's the matter of how you're performing them with position of the rib cage and hips that make them better.
totally, totally. I think I see it a lot. I'm not trying to like bash anybody, but I'll tell people about dead bugs, or even have clients, and I see them doing dead bugs, and they're like talking to someone in the middle of a dead bug, or talking in the middle of the dead bug. It's like you're not getting the full purpose of this movement.
Right.
Like it's about breathing. You shouldn't be talking
Correct.
at all.
No,
Just
that's one
funny,
of
but
mine. And I
let's.
think what you mentioned earlier about the static holds, the anti-rotations and the anti-extensions, I think those for me are the next step up from a dead bug. So make sure you can anchor that rib cage down against some sort of tension before you start putting your spine and movement side to side, forward and back, or rotating. That's how
Mm,
I usually like to progress people is okay, now that they got it, they've done it against air in their own body. Can we add some sort of band weight or some resistance elsewhere? Can they keep that position in a half kneel, tall kneel, or upright
mhm.
position? So you're going through
Yeah.
checklists. Can they do this? Okay, yes they can. Can I unilaterally load them? Yes, now they can load that. I'm going to try squatting them because I have confidence that standing on 2 feet, they can ground themselves, a very important connection, and then they can maintain that position and get into a squat or deadlift or split squat or press.
And before we segue over into the squat mobility topic, let's just throw out a couple of ways to train the core. We already said the dead bug. We threw the bird dog in to the weekly workout. We like Palloff presses in any different sort of
Yeah,
position, like you said, half kneeling, tall kneeling,
all three of those.
standing. Yeah,
Shops are another
um,
one.
you know,
They're like
chops,
a
lifts.
progression from payoff press, but you're now starting to integrate triplanar movement and say, okay, I can lock this down and now I can control the rib cage moving that way. I think those are, I mean, hands down, one of my favorite. They're brutal, but they're so efficient if done right.
I love cable lifts and
Mhm.
cable chops. They go a long way.
Very, very
Um,
underutilized sometimes. Sometimes I forget them in my pro. I'm like,
totally.
damn, I'm throwing that in.
I love just getting a sledgehammer on a tire and just working on perfect form, coming down right over from my right shoulder over down the left
Yeah.
hip.
I mean,
But
then we're talking you can do that same movement with a med ball, come over the shoulder, slam. It just
yep,
becomes more dynamic. Abs are built for dynamic movement, but we got to get there. And once you get there, it's like power, explosiveness.
yeah.
Now you're training, you're getting everything right. Systems to go.
And we'll throw in. I love doing leg lowering drills with people. Just really keep able to basically keep their pelvic floor engaged when they're lying on their back. Just like maybe a band that they're anchored to something, and they're just keeping their rib cage engaged. Their serratus is on, and then they're just alternating lowering one leg down. It's a good one. So let's go ahead and hop into squat mobility. I know that you probably have a mouthful to say about this one. Eric's like personally trained to coach the Arthur squat method. It was there's 30 other trainers at the biggest gym in Post Office Square in downtown Boston, and all of us are like looking for about 85 to 90% for squat mobility, right? Like, okay, if they're wide, that's fine. Like, they got good depth. Okay, like we have an hour to get them groomed up and out of here. Like, let's just pick and choose our battles type deal. But you'd always see Eric over in the corner getting everyone to come narrow stance, getting everyone to make sure their adductors are on, everyone to get their pelvic flooring on, and it's so important. It's so important. So go ahead, take the mic. I know you got this one.
I love squatting. I love coaching it. Um, but yeah, I mean, for the squat, for mobility and stability, the the stacking that we talked about in the core is is key, because if you don't have that, then you're sacrificing movement, and you're sacrificing correct movement for it. You can still do it, you can still squat without it, but the efficiency goes down, and other strategies of muscle activation start to turn on. And that's where, for me, I'm always coaching this one style of squat first, so someone can master that and get a feel for it. And then I can allow them to, okay, you want to go wider feet? Boom, you can. And the the squat is basically a very narrow stance. I mean, we're within hip width of stance. We're not narrowed. We're not toes pointed out. We're toes straight, narrow. Sometimes I will put a ball between the knees so you can squeeze and make sense of your adductors as you squat down. Unloaded, of course, at first. But it's, to most people, their their sense of close feet together is messing with their neurological system. They do not want to go there.
I 100% agree because
I
I
didn't
lived
either.
it. I started off the bodybuilder style, West Side barbell style, and it was always just like wide makes me stronger. Wrong. My depth wasn't as good as it could have been. Um, Numbers. I mean, I'm still able to hit like 340, but still, I've reached a plateau, and I'm actually at a phase now where I'm going back and focusing on these little corrections and really cleaning up all my forms to watch my numbers go up, and I'm looking forward to it because when you go wide, I get Westside Barbell talks about how you're basically creating a slingshot between your
Correct.
knees and you're getting that stretch reflex to pop you back up. And not only are you coming up, you're coming in from that slingshot with your knees out to the side there. Technically, when you drive your feet in the floor and you externally rotate your feet, you will feel more glute engagement. The downside is you are upregulating your external rotators and you are creating the opportunity to downregulate your adductors and your internal
Yeah.
stabilizers. So what happens is people end up actually losing their pelvic flooring, creating more hip tightness, and um, it has its strengths. If you are a power lifter or just an athlete, any in general, because for the most part, at high levels, athletes don't really get much focus on mobility anymore. They just want you guys to perform. Um, but it's something to keep in mind. If you're getting a lot of hip tightness, get a lacrosse ball, turn that TFL off. Turn off. You have a couple other external rotators, glute med you could turn off, but a couple others in the hip there that could be just over regulating and taking too much load. But yeah, so that's kind of the difference. Westside Barbell says that that's the best for putting up
And
numbers. Arthur Squat,
I can't
go
really
ahead.
disagree with that. I mean, because if you look at the West Side Barbell guys, I mean, those guys put up some pretty impressive numbers. Um,
But we got to put a
right.
little asterisk in there
Of
because
course,
of
it,
all their
it is
supplements.
powerlifting, and that is what their sport is. So the wider they go, they can create more force. They also are moving less distance to move that weight. I that's
Right.
the world they live in. We're For me, it's about functionality and health and longevity and correct
100%.
um correct advantages for the body position. And even athletes,
Correct. Correct.
correct. Yeah.
Kinesiology, essentially.
So when people see that, oh yeah, they squat wide, I still feel my glutes. It's like great, but I mean, I don't think that's a great strategy to do every week, twice a week, if you're squatting twice a week. And then with athletes, my always argument is, and you'll see athletes squat however they want to sometimes, but the more narrow sports specific stance, I mean, most athletes are runners. If you have to run, you're not running wide stance. You're running probably toes straight, you're creating force. If I'm going to get you better, I'm going to get you better in a narrow stance because that's where you're going to be able to produce the most force off the ground. And I need those adductors to fire. When you're sprinting, that's adductors,
Yeah.
glutes, hamstrings, quads. Wide stance squats, I get glutes and quads, but where are my adductors coming through the floor?
Yeah.
Um,
And then take what you're saying now, and I'm strengthening myself in an externally rotated position, and now I
yeah,
go run a lot. What's that going to do to my medial
exactly.
meniscus? You know
There's
what I mean? It's going to put so much load on the knee in the improper way.
And that's a big thing with I've gone back and forth with this for years, toes in, toes out, knees in. To me, when I go knees out, I can feel my pelvic floor do different things. And when you're driving the knees out, you get that external rotation. You're actually changing the angles of your acetabulum a little different. So instead of having your pelvic lined up over the rib cage and in a more neutral position, as soon as you externally rotate, you're kind of telling your hips to go forward and out because they have to. When you externally rotate, your hips move, and that can push us into an anterior pelvic tilt already. Once you get there, like what Matt said, then you're compromising the pelvic floor underneath. Once those hips start to go into an anterior pelvic tilt and abduct away from each other, we're losing that pelvic floor. And that is key for because the pelvic floor is holding everything up inside our gut. It's holding the organs there, it's holding everything up. But once you lose that pelvic floor, then the abs go and then it can become more compression, posterior, spinal column, sacrums, SI joints.
That's
So
yep, yep.
that's where for me it's always narrow stance and having the person squatting understand why they are squatting. Not just say like, okay, but okay, you're squatting here, you're gonna feel hamstrings, you're gonna feel adductors, but this is why I want you to, because I want you to be able to squat down and pick up your 2-year-old nephew off the floor and not have to like sumo squat and bend over and feel your lower back. I want you to be able to just bend over and tie your shoe without having to do crazy movements to get around that because you're tight or stiff. And that's what we want. We want to keep fluid movement.
Yeah, and you could fall into the trap of, well, I have knee pain, I have ankle pain, I have hip pain. Well, then you probably need to go see a physical therapist and get
That's
assessed, get
your
things
system
broken
is
up, get
off. If
some
you have that
some
kind of pain, your system is off somewhere and your movement is inefficient.
right. Right, and get someone to really get the magnifying glass
Go through it.
and figure out what little muscle needs to be turned off or scraped or some myofascial released or what needs to be turned on, and then go back to your workouts. But you will totally be stronger if you can keep your feet under your pelvic flooring. It's
and
just
and
how it
find those
works. I mean, you're
hamstrings.
stronger
Yeah.
medial, right underneath your center of gravity. And yeah, find those hamstrings. That's the big one, is really trying to get people to contract the hamstring to really pull everything down.
Because that's those
Um,
hamstrings help keep those hips in hip extension so they don't tilt forward into your pelvic tilt. So as you're coming down, those hamstrings are holding your pelvises in place. So your hips can't change position underneath and the lower back kick in. So if you don't have those coming down, you're not getting the depth that you think you're going to get because your hips are now going forward while your spine's trying to stay straight and you're still trying to go down. So it it takes some time to relearn. You will see weights go down, you'll see numbers go down, but I can guarantee you performance will go up. You'll feel better squatting and you'll get more out of your squat. No more hip flexors.
And I want to add in there too, kind of contrasting, or not contrasting, but goes hand in hand with getting those hamstrings to contract, is what can prevent that from happening and unable to keep your hips in extension are your tensor fasciae latae (TFL), your iliacus, your psoas. You have a pectineus, another muscle involved in hip flexion that, from a seated position, gets over activated and over regulates in a squat uh, pattern and will flex those hips, preventing them from staying in extension. So sometimes it does take seriously getting in there with a lacrosse ball or getting a professional to look at you and see if you have good mechanics. Because yeah, because it's really because technique trumps all. I think a lot of times we chase numbers intrinsically,
Or
um,
muscles, right? Or muscles. Like,
and
oh, let's train this.
well, we
Like,
all
yeah,
do, right? And you get to a point where like your form's great and your numbers are great, and you're like, well, let's see how much stronger I can get, and you surprise yourself. But then you come back to the squat maybe a month later, in 1 rep max terms or even 5 rep max terms, and your mechanics are off just because it happens over time. Just little muscles turn on, stay on longer.
that is a great word
You know,
because I think we're coming to know most people like, oh, we're training muscles, which we are, but we're not. Like we're training for mechanics. We're training the squat mechanics. We're training the split squat mechanics. That's what we're training. We're training a chain of muscles to perform a movement to get the most efficient movement out of that. We're not training quads in a split squat. Like I know we are, but I think we need to say that okay, we're training mechanics of a whole system here. We are one giant system that's
right?
working together and we need multiple parts to function just like a car can. You're not driving a car without a transmission. Well, you could, but where are you going to
Totally.
go? You're not you can go, but are you going to get far? What's going to happen? So, I'm on board with the word mechanics. We're training mechanics. Movement mechanics.
Yeah, you're trying to. It's funny because it's not like you're trying to get into one position and then stay there. It's not like you're trying to get this great mobility and stay there. It's you're trying to improve the way your body can articulate around things under
Yeah.
load and
Dynamic flow,
and different tension.
side to side.
Yeah,
You're going into
totally.
movements, you're coming out of movements. The body's built that way.
I think that's why things like animal flow have become so popular because they kind of get down to the foundation of what we really are doing. And in reality, Jack LaLanne is the one who put gyms on the map, and gyms are a supplement. Gyms are supplemental locations, or excuse me, gyms are supplements for lack of physical activity that we would get in our everyday life because we're not out and about anymore. We're very stagnant
Our body is built
individuals.
to move, it needs to move. Not moving is a problem.
And moving too much is a problem. Hypermobility is a problem too. So it's funny. You're like, well, what's right? It's like, well, that's
Balance
life,
it.
man. It's life is a balance. You got to get on that tip of that pyramid, and at any sort of second, it can tip over one way or the other. Every focus has its shortcomings. Every gain has its loss. Every strength has its weakness. So it's just constant. That's what keeps it fun because you get really good at squatting one day. Well, next day, what's the next like problem, right? Like was your breathing off? Was your core weak? Were you unable to feel your hamstrings that much? Okay, well then that's your next strength that you need to build up. But yeah, I don't want to ramble on too long. I want to give us enough time to talk about FODMAP. But did you have anything else you wanted to wrap up squat
Oh,
mobility
we
with?
can jump into the good old FODMAPs.
All right. Well, I got us a little definition from the
And
interwebs
it's quick
here so we can help people be on the same
because
page.
it's a
Um,
good acronym. A little confusing, but it's good.
it is. It's confusing as shit. When I first read it, I mean, it's just another way of basically saying stuff that can, excuse me, cause inflammation in the gut for people who are hypersensitive.
Correct.
But it is a good acronym. It means fermentable, oli, di, and mono, and polys. So FODMAP. So, you know, it's short chained carbohydrates or
Complex sugars.
yeah, and they're typically things that are going to cause fermentation in your gut. Um, and the reason they're important to talk about is because they are associated with um, low inflammation in the gut, pre- cleaning up the gut in terms of preventing leaky gut and a damaged gut wall. And I just want to do a little background anatomy wise. Like your gut is about, it's a long tube from your mouth to your butt, so it's on the outside of your body. It's a piece of skin that is one cell layer thick and has the surface area of a whole tennis court. So you got to think about the things that you can eat can get stuck along the way and ferment, um, and that would maybe cause like some bad gas or some bloating. Um, and then also the things that you eat, certain molecules, the way that they are shaped, can actually cut that gut lining and allow for things to sneak in that shouldn't get in and bind to sites and mimic other neurotransmitters and cause a host of other problems. So you really got to think about um, you wouldn't want brake fluid or toxins or disgusting things on your skin because you're afraid, I don't want that on me. Same thing with what you eat. It's literally trying to absorb through a one cell layer thick wall to get to your body for nutrients. So you don't want to damage that system. I think it's so I uh, sub- prescribe to the belief that food is medicine and medicine is food. So what you eat's either contributing to your health or going to contribute to your body's dis-ease, and that's where the word disease comes from. But kind of along the lines of where we've gone this year, in our third year of Think Fitness Life podcasting, we went from elimination diets, kind of getting used to um, understanding what makes you feel good and what causes discomfort or issues, digesting them, and determine any minor food allergies. We talked about the food pyramid. We talked about calories, and now we're at FODMAP. I think it's another important one because fermentable foods can cause a lot of damage in the
Yes.
gut. Different fructans, um, and yeah,
Bloating,
it's just another
gas.
diet. And
It
yep,
can,
yep,
if someone's out there and you're having these symptoms, and believe it or not, some of these foods are actually really healthy foods that can cause bloating and gas and buildup and stuff. But people just wouldn't realize it. I mean, stuff like sometimes broccoli, onions, asparagus, chickpeas, milk is a big one. High fructose fruits, apples, pears, mango, peaches, and stuff like sometimes even mushrooms, cauliflower, avocado, plums, and cherries. Those are stuff on the high FODMAP content food side. And we're not saying that they're bad. I eat avocados and I'm fine. There's certain foods that I've
yeah.
eaten that ferment differently in my gut and produce gas and bloating, and I stay away from those foods. So on these, it's more of a along the lines of elimination diet. You're if you're having these symptoms, you're going to take out the foods that are on the high FODMAP list. You can replace them with foods that are low in FODMAP and see how you feel. And that's where I think it's a very good guideline to use.
I think another important piece to mention too is kind of the purpose of FODMAP is to figure out what or excuse me, it's really not trying to figure out anything except besides really just from lowering gut inflammation. If you're someone who has irritable bowel syndrome or just GI symptoms in general, we talked about them before: bloating, excess gas, bad smelling gas, pain, uh, altered bowel habits, constipation, diarrhea, etc. But when we eat something and we have trouble digesting it, sometimes it's also due to enzyme or coenzyme production. So, an enzyme is going to be a protein that's going to help speed up and mediate your digestion. And along with that, it takes a coenzyme that are smaller molecules that assist in breaking down. So sometimes you might feel like things cause you issues, and it's actually because you're lacking enzymes. One
Yep.
little quick tip is, if your stool is floating a lot in the toilet, it's typically because you're not actually absorbing fats properly, and a lot of your stool is the fats that you're trying to consume. Unless you're someone who's just trying to lose a lot of weight, right? Um, so sometimes someone sees like a digestive enzyme, especially someone who's lost their gallbladder, because in that case, that's where you store your enzymes that break down fat. Um, a good resource for low FODMAP diet is this Monash University, Monash. They're out of Australia. They've done a lot of research on all these little compounds. I even bought their app. It was like $10 on the Play Store or Apple Store, or whatever, Android, iPhone, yada yada. And it has a complete list. You can look up cassava flour, you can look up coconut flour, and you can look up all the servings that are recommended until it gets to the point where it's bad for you and fermentable and has issues. Or you look up certain things and it'll be like watermelon or pineapple and be like, oh, it's high in fructans, so you want to have it in low dosage because it has ability of having a high inflammatory response in your gut. So again, I think FODMAP is going to be geared more towards people who have specific GI issues, but that's becoming more and more common with diverticulitis, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, or just all the list of symptoms we talked
And
about
you
before.
probably never don't necessarily have to have one of those diagnosed. If you're just feeling different, or maybe it could be some like brain fog, grogginess or stuff, you could try it. Try a low FODMAP diet. See if it changes it, because we know that the gut and the brain are definitely one giant loop and they talk to each other. So if there's an issue, try it out. And what I've also found is not all foods that are on the FODMAP high count list, but also some of them are higher in the lectin count too. So it's kind of like I don't
Mm.
know. I'll have to look it up and research, but it's almost like a double whammy. It's like, okay, some of these are high in FODMAPs and high in lectin. Could this thing be really a gut bomb for some people? And I think, yeah, it's gonna be. So watch out for those. Have those foods in your list. Eliminate them. Try not to eat them too frequently, and you're fine. You'll be good.
Yeah, like generally speaking, if you look up low FODMAP diets, they'll give you good resources for what you can eat. And I think that's a lot of times where we go wrong as professionals trying to coach people up on dietary changes is we just list all the things they can't eat. And then it's just like in their
Right.
headspace, right? It's like you tell me I can't have a cookie, now I'm thinking about fucking eating a cookie. So just you know what I mean? Like if you told me like, hey Matt, eat some broccoli with some sunflower seeds and some olive oil and balsamic and throw some spinach and rice on that. I'm like, that's starting to sound good. And then have some chicken after or before that, right? Like that sounds good. But if you start telling me what I can't eat, now all I'm thinking about is what I can't eat. So I think that's important to mention. And let's we're about that time. I think we can go ahead and make our wrap up statements and then our food for thought.
be diligent of what you're eating, what we're putting into our body, and how our body's going to react to it. It's all about how our bodies respond to food. Some people feel better on certain foods, other people's don't. And then, of course, when it comes to training, abdominals are the king. Breathing controls position. Breathing is king. You master breathing, you master abdominals. There's probably no exercise that you can't do. Mobility will come, stability will come. Improve your squats, drop them low, narrow stance, be efficient each and every day. That's all I got.
Nice. My stupid alarm's going off, so I gotta go to Krav
Time to go.
Maga. There we go. No. So my wrap up is feel your core, pelvic floor. Feel your core in everything you do before you go to load. Um, Squat mobility, it's important. Ankles, knees, and hips working together. And then your shoulders and rib cages are also working to keep your core engaged. So it's just such a good movement for the human body to do. And then FODMAP, we like we said, diet based on fermentable foods, really good for people who have GI distress or any of those symptoms we talked about. Something that definitely to look up. And our food for thought this week, kind of going along with everything we talked about and all those little recommendations for those of you who are having issues in any one of those areas, the quote applies, and it's the food for thought this week. The secret to your success is in your daily routine. Mic drop. All right. Well, that's it for this week, and we'll catch you guys next week. Thanks for listening. We hope you gained something from this episode. Our mission is to help people live their best life, both physically and mentally. Check out thinkfitnesslife.com for additional resources and schedule a complimentary assessment with one of us. We're always here to help.